In this section, we are going to focus on improving the IK part of the leg rig. The main focus will be on enhancing the foot mechanism. As always in this course, we are building on what we already learned. So there will be plenty of things you're already familiar with, but we are taking things to the next level, adding more complexity, automation, and just an extra layer of coolness. Let's dive in. Okay, I'm going to close the driver editor for now. And since I want to work on the IK mechanism, I'll make sure that the FK IK value is set to 1. This way I'm in IK mode and I'll be able to test whatever changes I make to the IK mechanism. I'll reset the rig and hide all bones except for the IK, and also highlight the IK collection so that any new bones I may add will be added to this collection. I guess we can set display to octahedral because there are no overlapping bones. And now let's finish setting up the foot bone as we did in level 1 and level 2. You should be familiar with this, so try to do it yourself. Okay, so again, the problem is that when we move the torso down, the foot sinks into the ground. So we solve this by going to edit mode and parenting the foot bone to the IK target bone. Keep offset. Now we want to fix the fact that we can disconnect the foot from the shin. And we do that by selecting the shin, shift selecting the foot, Control Shift C, copy location, and setting head tail to 1. Before we move on to the next topic, here is something that I want to mention at this level. I have prepared a special scene and I have set up my IK constraint as usual, but I haven't set up the foot yet, so it sinks through the ground. If I select the foot bone and go to the bone tab, expand relations, here I can see information about the parenting of this bone, and also there are special settings for the parenting. So for example, here we can enable connected or disconnected parenting, which is the same as pressing Alt-P and disconnect bone. And there are other settings. One of them is inherit rotation. So if I disable it and then go to pose mode and then try to move the spine, you'll see that the sinking of the foot is actually fixed. And if I move the spine up, the foot doesn't disconnect. So it may seem like a one-click solution to this problem. But if I select the root and rotate it, you'll see that this foot is not rotating with the whole rig. And the idea of the root bone is that it just moves and offsets the whole rig. This is because disabling this inherit rotation setting makes the foot bone ignore the rotation not only of its direct parent, but from the entire hierarchy, all the way down to the root bone. So while it may seem like a really nice, quick, and simple solution, it has really important negative consequences. I'm mentioning this because you may see this in other tutorials, and so I wanted to warn you why this is not a good idea. So enable inherit rotation, and in general, don't touch this area too much until you really know what you're doing. Okay, back to our main tutorial. Next, we are going to create pivots for our foot system. This will be basically the same as in level 2, except that we'll have 2 more pivots on each side of the foot. So this may be a little bit difficult, but save your file and give it a try. It will work in the exact same way, it's just 2 more pivots that you need to parent. Okay, let's go to edit mode and add our pivots. In level 2, we extruded the pivots. I'm going to cancel this and undo because that created existing parenting, and then parenting everything together was a little bit difficult. So this time instead, I'm going to select this point here and press Shift S, cursor to select it, and then just press Shift A to add a new bone. With individual origins, scale it down. And this will be my toe pivot. And actually, I don't want it exactly at the bone. I want to align it with the geometry. So like this at the tip of the foot. Press F2 and name this bone foot pivot toe.r. Then I can press / to isolate. Select this bone, Shift D and duplicate it. Set snapping to vertex. Keep snapping disabled. G to grab the bone and hold Control to snap it at the foot. And let's rename this pivot to pivot foot.r. Then I'll go out of local mode, Shift D, and I'll place this bone at the heel and rename it to pivot heel. Then from the front view, I'll duplicate the foot pivot and place it on the inside edge of the foot and name it foot pivot inside. Shift D and place it on the outside and rename this to pivot outside. Actually, foot pivot foot may be a little bit weird, so let's rename this to foot pivot ball.r. And now again, these pivots are just pivots for the IK. So what we want to do is parent the IK to it, and because a bone can have only one parent, we'll do our consecutive parenting. And now we have more bones, so the ball, toe, and heel will be as before. Then the heel will be parented to the inside pivot and inside pivot to outside pivot. All of these pivot bones are not parented to anything, so we shouldn't have any parenting issues like in level 2. So let's parent the IK target to the ball, ball to toe, toe to heel, heel to inside, and inside to outside. Now the heel raises the heel. This bone raises the foot from the toes. This one bangs from the inside and then from the outside. Now we need one more pivot at the ankle itself. So again, let's go to edit mode, Shift D and duplicate this bone. Scale it up with individual origins. I'll press Alt P and clear any existing parenting. And then I'll parent the outside pivot, because currently it is the topmost pivot, to the new bone. Control P, keep offset. Now this new bone moves the whole setup, and the pivots act as individual pivots. The original IK target will now be an MCH bone because it is not meant to be animated manually anymore. And the new control that we created will get the normal leg IK target name. One thing that we haven't set up yet is the behavior of the ball roll. We want the toe to stay straight when rotating from this point. So let's go to edit mode. I have my 3D cursor exactly here, so I'll press Shift A again and add a new bone. Scale it down, and if you remember, we solved this by setting a dump truck constraint on the toe, targeting this bone. And again, if you remember, we made a copy of the toe, which is automated, and the original toe stays unautomated and parented to this new bone. So let's parent the original toe to the new copy we created. Control P, keep offset. And let me name this MCH toe IK.R because it is meant to stay automated and not be animated directly. So in pose mode, I'll hide the original toe, select this bone, which will be toe target.R, then shift select the MCH toe, Control Shift C, dump truck. Now the toe stays straight, but I can select the original toe and offset and animate it manually. There is one thing that we still need to do. If I rotate this bone, the toe target should rotate with it. So all we have to do is go to edit mode and parent the toe target to the toe pivot. Control P, keep offset. Let me reset the rig. And so far, we did almost the same as in level 2, except that we added 2 more pivot bones. Now we are going to do something actually new, and it's going to be very cool and make this foot rig a lot more user-friendly. So in the previous chapter, we already had this problem that if I rotate on the toes, the heel stays behind. So technically I can still rotate on the heel, but I'm not supposed to, because now this heel pivot is not really at the heel, and so it doesn't really fulfill its purpose. The reason this works is that once I raise the foot on the toes, I'm not really supposed to rotate it on its heel. That doesn't make any physical sense. So this setup works because each pivot is meant to be used individually and not combined with each other. However, by having all of these bones exposed, we make it possible for the animator to do something that is not realistic. So now we'll add one single control bone that will control 4 of our pivots. Only the ball pivot will stay unautomated for now. Let's go to edit mode, and I'll select my heel bone, Shift D and duplicate it, and scale it up. And this will be our foot roll control. So press F2 and name this bone foot roll.r. Now I want this new control bone to rotate my pivots. Which constraint can I use for that? Of course, copy rotation. So let's select the roll, shift select the heel pivot, Control Shift C, copy rotation. And let's try to set things up only for this bone, and then the rest will just fall into place for the remaining 3 bones. For target and owner, I'll switch to local space and local space. Now when I rotate the foot roll, the heel bone rotates with it. That's nice, but it rotates with it fully. I only want it to rotate on the x-axis. I'm in local mode here, and I can see that this axis is the x-axis. So I could disable y and z. Now the heel bone will not react when I rotate the control left and right. But it still rotates forward, which I don't want. So we need another constraint. And it's a constraint that we haven't used so far, but take a look at the list of constraints and see if you can figure out which one it is. It is limit rotation. Limit rotation, as the name suggests, allows us to control how much a bone is able to rotate. By the way, limit rotation does not have a target. It's a constraint that just acts on its own on the bone that it is applied to. And that makes sense because we are just limiting the rotation values of the constrained bone. I'll switch owner to local space because what I care for is limiting the local x-axis of this bone. So let's enable limit x, and now we have a min and max value. Let's go to our roll bone and look at the rotation values. And as always in Blender, the default mode is set to quaternion. Here, switching to Euler will make things much easier for us because it gives us these clean X, Y, and Z axes. The pivot bone can stay in quaternions because it is constrained, so this mode doesn't matter that much. Let's play with the X value. And giving the roll bone negative X values rotates backwards. So for the limit rotation constraint, I'll leave max to 0. So this bone won't be able to rotate forward. And I'll set minimum to minus 90 or so, which will allow it to rotate backwards. Select the roll bone, rotate it back, and the heel pivot will rotate with it. But if I rotate it forward, the heel pivot will stop and it will do nothing. So this is perfect. It already works because we disabled the Y and Z axis. So even if I rotate the control bone left and right, the heel doesn't react. Alternatively, you can also enable Y and Z limit rotation and just leave all values to 0. And then you could enable Y and Z axis and the setup will still work. I'm just mentioning this quickly, hoping that it will give you additional understanding into how constraints work and how they combine together. To set up the remaining 3 pivots, we'll need almost the same constraint setup, except that we'll need to tweak the values on the limit rotation constraint. So let's hide the control, select the remaining 3 pivots, shift select the heel pivot, pause, constraints, copy constraints to give these pivots the exact same constraints, and Alt-H to unhide the control. Now the toe pivot needs to do the opposite of the heel pivot. So its minimum needs to be 0, which will prevent it from rotating backwards. And its maximum should be positive 90, which will allow it to rotate forward. And Y and Z will all be set to 0. Okay, and that is exactly what happens. Rotating this control forward now raises the foot from the toes, backwards from the foot. And now this doesn't work for 2 reasons. One is that the outside and inside bones are not fully set up with their limit rotation constraint. And another is that we most likely have a circular dependency. Let's go to Edit mode, select this roll bone, go to the Bone tab, Relations, and because I copied this bone from the foot heel, it kept the same parent. The parent can be verified here under Relations. So the problem is that the foot roll bone is parented to the inside pivot bone. At the same time, the inside pivot bone has a copy rotation constraint which has the foot roll bone as a target. And this is a circular dependency. Resolving dependency loops is not optional. You have to do it right away because they may cause parts of your rig to behave unpredictably, making your rig unusable. Here we can solve this problem by just removing the parent of the foot roll bone. So Alt-P, clear parent. And the problem will be almost fixed. We still have a slightly weird behavior, and that's because the heel is parented to the outside, and the limit rotation of this bone is still not set up correctly, so it rotates backwards with the control, and then it moves its child. So let's set up limit rotation on the inside. We don't want this bone to rotate backwards and forward at all. So I'll set limit X, minimum and maximum to 0. You could also disable the X-axis in copy rotation. And we want this bone to rotate on the Z-axis. So negative Z rotates in this direction. Therefore, I have to set limit rotation minimum Z to -90, and max will stay to 0, so that this bone cannot rotate in this direction. Okay, so we are almost there. All we have to do is set up the outside bone, set limit X to 0, 0, and limit Z to 0 to +90. Okay, now rotating the roll bone in each direction only affects one single pivot bone at a time. So all of these pivot bones will now become MCH, and I'll be able to just hide them and control the foot roll with this single control. But I'll still have the ball as a manual control. So let's name these bones MCH dash. This toe target is also MCH. And at this point, I guess we can start organizing our MCH bones in an MCH collection. So that we can hide bones that we don't really want to see. Later in the course, we'll do even better organization, but this should work for now. So now we have this really nice foot control. Actually, after some testing, I see that I need to parent my foot roll to the IK target. This way, the foot roll will move with the IK target, which makes more sense. And something else I noticed earlier is that I haven't parented the IK target to the root. So let's do that. Shift select the root, Control P, keep offset. Let's stay on the topic of IK for just one more minute and we'll learn some advanced rigging tools. I'll hide the main bones and select my IK shin. Go to the Bone tab and find the Inverse Kinematics section. So every bone has special inverse kinematic settings. The settings we'll focus on here are the axis locks. So I'm in local orientations, and if I enable the rotation gizmo, I can see that the lower leg bends on the x-axis. A realistic shin bone is not supposed to bend sideways or spin on its own axis. And so we could lock the y and z axis, and that will make the behavior of the leg slightly more realistic. If I move the IK and disable y and especially z, you'll see how the leg change its orientation to something that is not really realistic, so I may have to tweak it with the pole target. That is why we are locking these axes. Although, of course, if you have a cartoony character, you may want to unlock these axes and achieve more cartoony deformations. And you may be asking, can't we just lock these rotation axes? Or couldn't we use the limit rotation constraint that we just used on the foot setup? And the quick answer is no. IK will disregard these settings. So you may start to notice that even though IK is one of the constraints, it's a little bit special. In technical terms, IK is always evaluated last. So the constraint stack rules are slightly different for the IK constraint. And that is why we have these special IK settings. I think we managed to learn a lot about IK. So let's move on to the next video where we'll create a completely new FK mechanism. It's an important rig feature which we'll call limb isolation. First, let's see what it is and why it's useful. I'm going to unhide my main bones and I want to switch IK-FK to 0 so that I'm in FK mode since I'll be working on the FK mechanism. I'll also hide the IK collection and unhide the FK. So in our rig right now, if I rotate any of the torso controls, the FK arms and legs just come along for the ride. They just rotate with the torso. With limb isolation, we can make the arms and legs keep their orientation while the body rotates. The easiest way to simulate this is to select an arm, for example this upper arm, and go to the Bone tab. And as in the previous video, I'm going to disable inherit rotation just temporarily. I'll do it for this arm, this leg, and also for the thigh fk.r. Now, if I rotate the torso, notice the arms and legs keeping their orientation. When I move the torso, they still move along, but they ignore the rotation of the torso. As it turns out, animators like this behavior a lot. They like it so much that many animators may prefer this to be the default behavior of their rig. And therefore, we are going to implement this behavior, but we are going to make it switchable so that the user of the rig can choose whether the limbs should follow the body or not. First, let's re-enable inherit rotation. Just like with IK, we cannot use it because it completely disables rotation from all parents, including the root, so it will cause as many problems as it solves. In here, you may have overlapping bones. Make sure that you have selected thigh fk.r and enable inherit rotation. Let's do some really quick rig organization. I want to mainly focus on the FK bones, but I also want the torso controls to be visible so that I can test my mechanism. So let's select these three main torso controls, press M, create a new collection, call it torso controls, press OK, and disable this general bones collection. Now we'll create the isolation mechanism, and I'm going to show you two ways to do it. The first one will use less bones, it is slightly less convoluted, and most importantly, it will allow us to use and learn some new settings which we haven't touched so far, which will also lead to better understanding of bone orientations. Okay, in edit mode, I'm going to create a copy of the thigh FK bone. And with individual origins, I'm going to scale it down. If I switch to B-bone mode, I can press Ctrl Shift and S to make this bone larger so that it's easier to select for parenting and constraints. I'll also make these bones a little bit thicker to distinguish them from the other bones in the spine. Okay, so now this new bone, which I'll call MCH thigh FK.R for now. This bone was copied from the original FK thigh, so it is still parented to the pelvis bone. And so it will move with the hips. Now, as a little challenge, try to think of a way to change the relationship of the main thigh FK bone to the bones in this area. You can use parenting and constraints and make it so it follows the rotation of this new bone we created, so that when I rotate the spine, it will move with it, but it will not follow its rotation so that we achieve this limb isolation effect. As always, it's okay to fail these exercises, but as long as you give it some honest effort, you will gain a lot more from this course than someone who just clicks where I click. Okay, so we can use a copy location constraint. So I can select this new bone, Shift select the FK bone, Ctrl Shift C, copy location. And now if I test it, the main thigh bone is still rotating fully with the body. And that's because this bone is still parented to the pelvis bone, which is not visible, but it's right here. So what we need to do is go to edit mode, press Alt P and clear the parent. Now this bone will not have any parent, but it is constrained to this bone with copy location. And there we go. This is the effect we're looking for. And we can still rotate this bone manually, which is important. But now we lost the default behavior of the leg rotating with the body. But we can get this back easily by giving this FK bone a copy rotation constraint. Let's select the new bone, Shift select the main FK bone, Ctrl Shift C, copy rotation. Now we can have the default FK behavior, or if we disable the copy rotation, we have the isolated behavior. Nice, but we still have a problem. When we enable copy rotation, we can no longer manually rotate this leg. One way we fixed this in the challenge of level 2 was to set replace to add. Unfortunately, that doesn't work well with world space orientations. So I can try switching to local space. Now I can rotate the bone manually, but for some reason it is not following the orientation of this bone, even though copy rotation is active. Feel free to stop and think why that is for a minute or two. The reason this bone is not copying the rotation of this bone is because the target is set to local space. Local space really means the local rotation of the bone, which means the amount this bone is rotated by itself and not by its parent. As you can see, when I rotate the target bone itself, then the leg FK bone does rotate. So what we can do is change the target from local space to local with parent. Now this setup will start considering the rotation of the parent of this bone, and the FK bone will be oriented to that. And this setup is the simplest solution to this problem. Now we are going to move to the slightly more complex setup, and the only reason is that, in all honesty, I don't usually use these mix modes much, especially not deep in the rig like this. While my guess is that this will work perfectly fine, I'm just slightly worried that there might be some gotcha and the rig won't work correctly in a very specific situation. So we are going to add just one additional bone and create a setup that I have used a lot and I'm very confident in. We are going to use a technique that we already used in level 2. I called it constraint plus child technique. So we want to create one more bone here, and we are going to offset these constraints onto that bone, and then just parent the main FK bone to that new bone. If you feel like it, give it a try. Okay, in edit mode, I'll create a copy of this bone, make it slightly longer and slightly thinner. I want to set it up exactly as I set up the main FK thigh, which means that I have to clear its parent. Then in pose mode, I'm going to select this bone, shift select the new bone, Control Shift C and give it copy location, and then one more time and give it copy rotation. And we'll leave both of these constraints using world space for target and owner. World space is highly reliable. It means that for copy location, this bone will always perfectly copy the location of the other one. And the rotation will always perfectly copy the rotation of the other bone. Now for the main thigh FK bone, we want to remove the existing constraints. Instead of clicking the X button here one by one, we can also press Ctrl, Alt, and C, and that removes all constraints from all selected bones. Then in edit mode, I just need to parent this bone to our newest bone, which now holds the constraints. Ctrl P, keep offset. Now, when I rotate the pelvis, the leg rotates with it. That is because the copy rotation constraint is enabled. When I disable it, I get the isolated effect. But whether copy rotation is on or off, doesn't matter. I can always manually animate and pose this thigh bone, because it is simply parented to the constraint bone, and parenting does not impose any limitations on the movement, rotation, or scale of the bone. So that is the full setup, almost. This will work perfectly unless you decide to do some sort of scaling of your rig. Let's select the root and press S to scale it. And notice the weird scaling, or rather the lack of scaling, in some parts of the right leg. That is because this bone here is now disconnected from the whole hierarchy, and it just uses copy location and copy rotation to follow the location and rotation of this bone. So scaling is ignored. So to fix this, all we have to do is select this bone, shift select the bone that has the constraints, Control Shift C, add a copy scale constraint, and now rescaling will work just fine. Okay, now you definitely have a solid isolation setup that will work in any situation. What we still need though is a custom property so that we can switch the isolation on and off depending on our preferences. So select the rig settings bone, go to the bone tab, custom properties, and add a new property. In the settings, I'm going to call it right leg, and I'm going to call it follow, which is a common naming convention that you'll see in other rigs as well, such as Rigify, for example. Default value min and max are all fine. Steps, I guess we can also set to 1, just like for the IK-FK switch. And press OK. Then right click on this new custom value, choose copy data path. I'll hide the bones collection. Go to my constraint bone, go to constraints, right click on influence and choose add driver. Now I can try to tweak the driver in this window here, but as soon as I move away, it will disappear. So we could again split the screen and have a driver editor, but another way you can do it is right click and choose open driver editor. And this will give me this temporary window that I can use. By the way, right click and edit driver will give you this very flimsy window, which is nice if you want to do a quick change. For more serious work, you can use the floating driver editor. And if you're working a lot on drivers, then split the screen and create a dedicated driver editor. For my expression, I want it to be just var, so it is equal to this thing that I'm going to set up right now. The object is going to be the armature, and actually I need to switch to single property. Here armature is already set up, and then in the path field, I'm going to paste the data path that I copied from my custom property. Now the default behavior is that the leg follows the body. But if I switch follow to 0, it will stop following and we'll see the isolated behavior. And I'll keep this as a default for now, and this is the full setup. Now let me just check if I can give better names to these bones. This bone can be MCH thigh follow.r because it determines whether the follow option is on or off. And this can be MCH thigh parent fk.r because it kind of acts as the topmost parent in this hierarchy. Now, if I switch to octahedral, you'll see all of these overlapping bones in this area. And even if I disable the main bones, we have these 3 overlapping bones here. And this is very common in rigging. The more complex you rig, the more of these overlapping bones you're going to have. And it can get pretty crazy with 4 or 5 or 6 overlapping bones in here. I'm trying to keep this to a minimum in this course, but I also want to at least mentally prepare you for the future of advanced rigging. The way we keep track of all of these overlapping bones and all of the many bones in our rig is through clear naming, varying the size of these bones, and using thickness in B-bone mode. And last but not least, organizing the bones into collections according to their functionality. Nice work implementing this completely new mechanism. Limb isolation can be used in many places. The arm actually benefits from this feature the most. We now have the right leg fully set up with nice mechanisms on both the IK and FK chains, as well as an IK-FK switch. Of course, we want the same on the left leg, which luckily is as simple as symmetrizing the right leg. We'll also want the same mechanisms on the arm. Again, we are in luck because the setup will be 99% the same as on the leg. So it's crucial that you understand the leg setup before moving forward. So let's symmetrize this whole right leg. I'll unhide all of my collections, press Alt-H to unhide any hidden bones, then go to edit mode and again press Alt-H just in case anything is hidden. And now because we may have changed some names on the right side while working on the mechanisms, I'm going to delete the whole left leg and then symmetrize the whole right leg. This is usually the most problem-free approach. However, I'm going to go on a little aside, as I sometimes do, but I promise you that the only reason I'm doing this is because it is important and it's something that can save you a lot of time and frustration. So I want to select and delete all of these bones on the left leg. I'll use circle selection here with C, check if everything is selected, and now I can delete the bones. Currently my X symmetry is disabled, but let's say that it was enabled. I'll enable it, press X, and delete the bones. Now because of X symmetry, some of the bones that did exist on both sides were deleted on the right side, which of course I didn't want. So this may seem like not a big deal. I can just press Ctrl Z and then disable symmetry and delete again. All seems fine, except if I go to pose mode and hide these bones, you may notice that my twist bones are not green, which means that they don't have constraints. They used to have constraints. That is what created the twisting mechanisms, but the constraints are gone. Crazy, right? So what happened was when I deleted these bones in edit mode and then I pressed Ctrl Z, that restored the bones, but any properties and constraints on these bones were deleted. So this is a crazy behavior of Blender's undo system, and it hasn't been fixed in more than 15 years. I hope it will be fixed, But until then, you have to know about it and you have to keep it in mind. So anytime you delete bones and you realize that you actually didn't want to delete them, don't just press Ctrl Z once. Press it as many times as you need. So I'll keep pressing undo until before deleting these bones. And then I'll go to pose mode, hide these bones, and you'll see that the constraints are back. So again, after deleting bones by accident, undo more than once and check if the constraints and properties are back. And under Edit Preferences, System, I would advise you to crank up the undo steps to the maximum of 256, which should give you enough undo steps for most cases. Okay, special segment over. Now we can delete the left leg. I'll go to edit mode, make sure that X symmetry is off. Press C for circle select and select all bones on the left leg. X to delete them. Then I'll hide the root bone and select everything on the right leg. Right click and symmetrize. Now we have the whole leg and all mechanisms symmetrized, but there is still some work to do. I'll start the main bones collection, select the thigh for example, go to constraints, and the driver from the influence of the copy transforms IK constraint is not there. Okay, on the right side we do have it, but on the Symmetrize side we don't. Unfortunately, Blender does not symmetrize drivers. But we can restore them easily. First, I'm going to copy this driver that I already have on the bones on the left side. Here is something that was added in Blender 4.2 and can save you some time. I'll select all left leg bones and then shift select the right thigh because it has this driver that I want. So I could copy this driver and then go back and paste it on all of the bones. But in 4.2 and later, I can also right click and choose copy driver to select it. And now this automatically pasted this driver in all selected bones. This is probably based on the constraint name here. So if your names are different, then it may not have worked. If you're using an older version of Blender or this simply didn't work for you, then of course you can still use copy driver and then paste driver. Okay, so now if I unhide my IK controls, I'll start the IK collection and try to move the IK controls. The leg is not reacting. That is because the FK IK value is set to 0, which is FK. If I set it to 1, then my IK will be active. However, this is supposed to be the property for the right leg. So we have to add a new property. Let's select the settings bone, go to the bone tab, scroll down and add a new property. I'll enable the properties for the right leg FKIK and copy the name. And then for the new property, paste this name and just replace right with left and change step to 1 and press OK. Now we have a new property. So I could copy the data path, but I don't necessarily have to. I'll hide the IK collection and select all of these bones that have the driver. Go to constraints, right click, open driver editor. And because I have all of these bones selected, in the drivers editor, I'll see the influence driver of all 4 bones. So I can just click on each individual one, go to the path and replace right with left. Okay, now that this is working, I'll copy the entire thing and then paste it for the remaining influence drivers. Okay, if anything is wrong with what you entered in the path field, let's say I have a typo here, the field will become red, which indicates that there is a problem. So I just need to fix this typo and it will work again. All right, so now we have an IK-FK switch for the left leg as well. Okay, all set up in the legs. Let's unhide all bones, select everything, Alt-R, Alt-G, Alt-S to reset the rig. And now we can focus on all the mechanisms of the arm. Again, I'll be working on the right arm. So let's go to edit mode. I have X symmetry disabled. I'll only work on the right side. So I'll select the upper arm, lower arm, and hand. And now again, I want to duplicate this arm and offset it up or sideways. And so I'll switch orientations to global. With global orientation, I can just press Shift D and then Z to move the bones only up in world space. And then I'll type 0.2 and enter. This gives me an exact offset of 0.2 units. Now I'll rename these bones. Upper arm fk.r, lower arm fk.r, and hand fk.r. Then select the bones again, Shift D, Z 0.2. Now this will be the IK chain. So let's press Ctrl F2 for batch rename. Switch to renaming bones. Find FK and rename it to IK. And then one more time, Ctrl F2, find .001 and replace it with nothing. Now our IK chain should be named properly. We already have collections for FK and IK. So let's select the FK bones, M, and move them to the FK collection. Then select the IK bones, M, and move them to the IK collection. This will allow us to easily hide and unhide these bones. Now let's set up the constraints. First, we'll constrain every bone of the main arm chain to the FK bones, and then again to the IK bones. So select each FK bone, Shift select the corresponding main bone, Ctrl Shift C, copy transforms. And to prevent this movement of the bones, let's switch to rest position. And then keep constraining. Lower arm to lower arm, hand to hand. Then the IK chain. The main reason we are offsetting the bones like this is for the constrained process, because when the bones are overlapping, it becomes difficult because of the way bone selection works in Blender at the moment. But after constraining and after separating the bones on collections, we can move them back in their place. So let's go to edit mode, select the FK bones, G, Z, and minus 0.2. Select the IK bones, G, Z, and minus 0.4 and enter. Okay, now I'm going to start the IK bones and set up the arm IK. This will be almost the same as the leg IK setup, but instead of having the IK target sticking out like this at the wrist, we'll have it as a copy of the hand bone. With that in mind, I recommend that you save a file and as a challenge, try to set up the IK yourself. Okay, for the IK target, I'm going to duplicate the hand bone and with individual origins, scale it down a bit. And let's name it hand target IK.R. As always, Alt-P and clear the parent. The pole target will be created as usual, E, Y, select the bone, Alt-P, clear the parent. Because of the orientation of these bones, the pole has a little bit of a roll. You can just press Alt-R and then GY to offset it backwards. And let's name it arm pole ik.r. Actually, the target can also be arm target ik.r. Now select the target, shift select the lower arm, shift I, to active bone to set up the IK. I'll set chain length to 2. Now to set up the pole target, I can actually use this eyedropper, and that will set up the armature. And until recently, it wasn't possible to use the eyedropper on bones, but since Blender 4.3, it became possible. So eyedropper and click on the arm pole. Let's switch back to pose position. And the arm will be flipped because of the pole target. So we have to adjust the pole angle. It looks like it's going to be about -90. Let's zoom in and enable and disable the constraint. And I can see a very slight flipping. So I have to play with the values. I'll try -91. And that gives me even bigger offset. So let's try -89. And yeah, this is almost perfect. Maybe -89.1. Okay, the offset is gone. And here we created the IK target oriented the same way as the hand. I believe this will be better for animation. To complete this setup, I'll select the IK target, shift select the hand, and press Ctrl-Shift-C and use copy transforms. Now moving the target moves the IK arm, and rotating it rotates the hand. And something else we'll do differently in the IK arm setup is that we won't parent the pole to the target. Because the arm has a lot more flexibility, and unlike the leg, just rotating the hand does not automatically rotate the elbow and shoulder. So instead, I'm going to unhide the main bones, and I'll parent the pole target to the shoulder bone. Okay, so now I can move the arm, rotate and twist it. I can adjust the elbow. And adjusting the shoulder will affect the elbow a little bit, which should feel natural. And that's the arm IK setup. Let's unstart everything and start the FK now. And now we want to create the exact same isolation setup as for the legs. So I know that I'm going to want 2 copies of the upper arm bone overlapping exactly at the head. So let's go to edit mode, select the upper arm, Shift D and duplicate it, switch to individual origins, scale the new bone down, Shift D, duplicate it, right click to cancel the movement, and again S to scale this bone slightly larger. Let's name these bones with the same naming conventions we used on the leg. So this is MCH thigh parent fk.r. So this would be MCH. To make the name shorter, I'll delete upper and just name it MCH arm parent fk.r. And the slightly larger bone will be MCH arm follow fk.r. So now let's revise the setup. The smallest bone will be parented to the shoulder bone. And it already is because we duplicated it from the FK arm bone. The slightly larger bone and the main FK bone, we are going to disconnect from this hierarchy by pressing Alt-P and clear parent. The upper arm FK bone will be parented to the MCH follow bone with keep offset, and the follow bone will be constrained to the parent bone using copy location, copy rotation, and copy scale. Let's go to pose mode, hide the big bone, select the MCH parent, shift select the MCH follow, Ctrl-Shift-C, and give it copy location, then copy rotation, and finally copy scale. I'll press Alt-H and start the torso controls to make them visible. Now, I'm not really testing the FK arm because I am in IK mode. So let's unhide the main bones. Select the upper arm, lower arm, and hand. Go to constraints. Set influence to 0 for the active bone, and then right click and copy to select it. Now I'm in FK mode, and we are going to create the FK-IK switching property in a second. So unstart the bones. Now I'm able to test the mechanism. Now the FK arm follows the body, but if I select the constraint bone and disable the influence, we'll get the isolated behavior of the arm. Nice, the mechanisms are in place. We just need the custom properties and drivers to automate them. I'll start the main bones, select the settings bone, go to the bone tab, custom properties, and I'm going to want two new properties, one for FK-IK switching and one for follow. And now I realize that I didn't create the left leg follow property, so we're going to come back to it at the end of the video. I'll create two new properties. Name the first one right arm FK-IK, switch step to 1, and press OK. Then the second one, right arm follow, step to 1, and OK. As you may notice, the properties get organized based on their name, which works well for us. Okay, now let's right-click on right arm FK-IK, copy data path. Then I'm going to start only the default bones collection. Select the upper arm, go to constraints, and before we set up the driver, let's name the constraints as before. The upper one is FK and lower one IK. Okay, on the upper arm, IK influence, I'm going to right click, add driver, and let's tweak this right here. The expression will be var, object is the armature, type single property, and paste the data path I just copied. Then select the hand, shift select the lower arm, and then finally shift select the upper arm, and then I could right click, copy driver to select it. And verify that I have the driver on all bones. Now switching this value to 0 should switch it on all constraints. Okay, next, go to right arm follow, right click, copy data path. Start only the FK collection. Go to the constraint follow bone. Right click on the copy rotation influence. Add driver. Expression var. Single property. Object is the armature and the path is what we just copied. Now let's test the rig. I'll move the IK a bit. Rotate the FK bone. And now if I tweak IK FK, I should switch between the two. Nice. And now in FK mode, I'll try to rotate one of the spine bones and then tweak the follow option. And it seems to work. Awesome. Okay, let's also add the follow option for the left leg. Select the settings bone, give it another bone property, name it left leg follow, step to 1, and OK. Right click on the new property, copy data path. Isolate the FK collection. Find the constraint bone. Add driver for copy rotation. And set it up like this. Okay, now let's initialize our rig. In other words, set the default values. I want my legs in IK by default, arm in FK by default, and all follow values to 0 by default. Looking good and great progress. We could symmetrize the right arm to the left arm, but because the mechanical arm is slightly different, I'm not going to do it just yet. Next, we're going to focus on the hand and set up some nice simple palm and finger automations.